from page Resh Samach Bet 262. We're in item 26. As preparation for the lesson, we will read some excerpts from the Kabbalists on the light that reforms. This is item 3 from Shemati 34, The Advantage of a Land. HaSulam writes, what should a person do in order to come to love the Creator? For this purpose, we are given the remedy of engaging in Torah and mitzvot, for the light in it reforms him. There's light there which lets him feel the severity of the state of separation. Bit by bit, as one aims to acquire the light of Torah, hatred for separation is created in him. He begins to feel the reason that causes him and his soul to be separated and far from the Creator. Before we go into the mutual study, we will read item 26 from the study of the 10 Sefirot, inner observation, item 26. Now we shall explain the second term, meaning the 5 levels of reflected light, which is an entirely different matter. It has already been explained in our observation part 2 that from the restriction down, the reflected light became the vessel of reception from the upper light instead of phase 4. It is because that reflected light that was rejected from Malchut, which Malchut does not receive due to the detainment in the screen, became a vessel and a receptacle for the light, as phase 4 was in Ein Sof. Thus, the new light, no light is received in the worlds except by way of the reflected light. See there. Now we'll move to hear the Rabash.
Item 26. Now we shall explain the second term. What was the first term? The changes in 4 phases of direct light, which we said that there are changes there from the perspective of the lower one and changes from the upper one. The changes from the lower one is that anyone who is close to Malchut is of lesser importance. One who is farther from Malchut is more important. The other change is from above downward. The first reason is more important. Is more important than the consequence. The second reason is more important than the second consequence. So anything that comes from above downward is less important. Now we will explain the second term, meaning the 5 levels of reflected light, which is an entirely different matter. It has already been explained in inner observation, part 2, that from the restriction downward, what is from the restriction downward? That it's forbidden to use the vessels that are called receiving in order to receive. Yeah? The reflected light was made, meaning its intention is in order to bestow. In vessels of reception, not from the upper one, became the vessel of reception for the upper one, for the upper light of phase 4. They received in order to receive. Now they can receive only as much as they can aim in order to bestow. as we explained there. Meaning, it is because that reflected light that was rejected from Malchut, which Malchut does not receive due to the detainment in the screen, saying if she receives it, it'll be in order to receive, became a vessel and a receptacle for the light, as phase 4 was in Ein Sof. Thus, no light is received in the worlds except by way of the reflected light. See there. What is written here? The second term and reflected light. What is reflected light? He wants to explain to us. So he says this. Instead, where prior to the restriction they received in order to receive, afterwards it's forbidden to receive in order to receive. This is called restriction. Instead of it, the reflected light is made. What is reflected light? The lower one wants to bestow upon the upper one. That's the vessel. If he has that vessel, he can receive. Otherwise, he can't. He also explains to us here where the reflected light comes from the screen. That the rejected light, on the rejected light, there are two interpretations here. One, light that is rejected altogether. He doesn't want to receive it. He only calculates how much he can aim in order to bestow, he will receive. And whatever he cannot aim in order to receive with, he will not accept. Now, what is the order? The light comes. He doesn't reject it. Meaning, with the first rejection, that he rejects it, by this, he receives the reflected light. And then he interprets there that reflected light is actual light. It's called direct light, and it's a result of two forces because of the retiring, what he rejects, what he doesn't want to receive. From the rejected light, which he does not receive. There's also a question about that. What is it? What it rejects? To not receive it with the intention, not receive it altogether, or what he does not want to receive in general. The rejected light means the light he does not want to receive altogether. And we should make another interpretation. The rejected light means light that is rejected from the screen, which he later calls surrounding light, which he doesn't receive at all. With that light, two discernments are made. The clothing light, which is the vessel, and the rejected light, which is also reflected light, which he doesn't receive at all. But that explanation isn't in there. There are aspects this way and that way. He doesn't give us a reason. Maybe afterwards we'll see. But here, it is implied according to the order that first he rejects it completely, and by rejecting it completely, the light that he rejects, that he removes, he rejects it, and then he receives some of it as reflected light, and that part now is divided into clothing reflected light and rejected reflected light. But in the interpretation, he will explain it. He doesn't give any more here. 27. Therefore, if the coupling by striking performed on the screen of phase 4, which is the primary receptacle in Ein Sof that clothed all the light up to Keter, which is the meaning of the light filling the entire reality. Now, however, when all that great measure has been rejected from her and has risen up as reflected light, that reflected light also clothes the entire height of the light up to Keter. That's okay. However, if it is refined to phase 3 in her, and the measure of phase 4 disappears from there, then the screen that rejects the upper light from clothing in her rejects only the measure of 3 phases. Thus, even if the light had clothed this vessel of phase 3, she would only receive from it up to Chokhmah. Hence, the level of reflected light is also short and close only up to Chokhmah, etc. Similarly, what is written here? We must remember a rule that we do not put ourselves into a trial, into a test, unless we are certain that we can succeed in the test, endure the test. Therefore, when phase 4 departed, we learn that the last phase is lost. It has an impression, a record of overcoming the light that was before. Now, there is no strength for that anymore. So now, he wants the screen, the power to overcome, over a smaller degree. Let's say from phase 3, which draws the level of Chokhmah. So now he went and drew not the level of Keter, he drew only the level of Chokhmah. He drew a smaller light. And that light which he drew was rejected. So he receives a part, inner light from the level of Chokhmah, and the part of surrounding light from the level of Chokhmah. But on the previous phase 4, he doesn't have it anymore. So he explains to us how the levels gradually diminish. Which depends on the measure of reflected light for the screen that he extends, that he draws. As we said, what is restriction? That he doesn't use coarseness. He doesn't receive whatsoever. What is the screen? That which lies on the coarseness. What does it mean, lies on? What I do want to receive, except what? It depends how much he can receive. 4 or 3 or part of them. It's called a coarseness over, a screen over coarseness. So each time you can use a smaller coarseness, it causes the degree to diminish each time. That's what he tells us here in item 27. You're asking, what does it mean that he says here, even if the light had clothed this vessel of phase 3, she would only receive from it up to Chokhmah. What do we learn here? We learn that the screen rejects the light. On phase 3, it rejects the light. If it didn't reject it, I would receive it in order to receive. How much would you receive of it? Only the level of Chokhmah, not more. As much as she drew. Again, we said an introduction. What does it mean? Even if the light that clothed this vessel, that's not how we learn. Start from the top. From the top. At the top, it's written like this. However, if it is refined to phase 3 in her, and the measure of phase 4 disappears from there, what does that mean? They say this. First, she drew the light of Ein Sof, which shone. And she made a screen and closed the part. And this we call the biggest degree by the name Keter of the light, or by the name fourth phase of the coarseness. When that was refined because of the inner and surrounding, we say, what is the screen? That which is on the coarseness. I told you that in spirituality, he doesn't draw abundance if he does not know that he cannot overcome the abundance. So what level did Patzuf Ab draw? The level of Keter. He drew the level of Chokhmah. So on the level of Chokhmah, he makes a screen and says, part I receive inside and part I don't want to receive. So it's rejected. Why does he say that? If he didn't say that, the screen only receives in order to receive. How much would he receive? Not more than what he drew. Phase 3. So he drew phase 4. He didn't draw initially to begin with. So now he's telling us that he rejects. How much does he have? Only Chokhmah, not more. What are you asking about that? 28. Just as the difference between Keter and Chokhmah of direct light is indeed great, precisely so is the difference between the level of Keter and Chokhmah of reflected light, immeasurably great. Even though in the reflected light we learn that the coarser is greater, this pertains to the vessels of extension, meaning the screen and the malchut, in which the coupling by striking is carried out. However, they need the more refined vessels for clothing of light, as it is necessary for the light to have equivalence of form with the vessel. The light is greater in the phases of direct light because it is more refined. See item 22. It is therefore obvious that when it comes to be clothed in the vessel of reflected light, that vessel must equalize with it. Consequently, it is necessary that if the level of reflected light reaches Keter, then there is refined and clear vessel there, fitting to clothe that great light of clear Keter. However, the level of phase 3, whose level reaches only up to Chokhmah, the merit of the level that clothes the light of Chokhmah is immeasurably lower than the vessel of Keter on the level of phase 4. Here too, it's unclear. What is written here? When he begins to speak, on the one hand we understand, meaning we learn a rule. We have 4 phases of direct light. 4 phases of direct light. In this, there are no changes whatsoever. If I say that Malchut receives Nefesh, which Malchut of direct light? Malchut of, meaning there's Zeranpin of direct light, receives Ruach. Bina of direct light receives Neshama. Chokhmah of direct light receives Chaya. Keter of direct light receives Keter. So, what did I see now? That the vessels are organized, arranged according to the direct light.
שבה קיימת חוכמה. פירוש הדבר, המלכות שלו,
if we say that the level of Chokhmah came, it means his Malchut of direct light, cannot overcome, but only over coarseness of phase 3 of the level of Chokhmah. So I need to say, Keter shines, Keter of Chokhmah, and in Malchut Nefesh for Chokhmah, in Zaranpin of Chokhmah. Can we understand this? Although Malchut drew the light, which Malchut? Malchut of direct light. And Malchut of direct light gives reflected light, even Keter. Malchut who gives reflected light, even Keter. Until we learn that by this, all the level is called the level of Keter for this reflected light, which equalizes each and every one to be at the same level. But we learned that the vessels of direct light do not undergo changes. Everything is according to its own direct light. This too we can understand. 2. He tells us here that although Malchut drew the light, there must be clothing. Now the question is, what does it mean, clothing? If clothing means according to the direct light, meaning it's true, Malchut of direct light drew the light. But since the light wants equivalence with the vessel, and since the vessel of Keter, we learned, is more refined than the vessel of Malchut from the perspective of direct light, so how does the Keter of the level clothe, specifically in the vessel of Keter? How does Nefesh of the level clothe, specifically in Malchut? Now, we need to go over it again. So we'll see what he says. I'm starting 28 again.
Just as the difference between Keter and Chokhmah of direct light is indeed great, precisely so is the difference between the level of Keter and Chokhmah of reflected light, immeasurably great. What is he telling us here? He gives us an example from 1 degree. Is there a difference between the Keter of a degree and the Chokhmah of a degree? Likewise, there's a difference between the degree of Keter and the degree of Chokhmah. That's what he says here. Look inside. Just as the difference between Keter and Chokhmah of direct light on the same degree is indeed great, precisely so we should learn is the difference between the level of Keter and Chokhmah of reflected light immeasurably great. That's it. Now another thing. Even though in the reflected light, the coarser is greater. There's a point missing here. Even though in the reflected light, the coarser is graded, period. Greater, this pertains to the vessels of extension, meaning the screen and the malchut in which the coupling by striking is carried out. 1. However, they need the more refined vessels for the clothing of light. Why? As it is necessary for the light. Which is called bestowing, to have equivalence of form with the vessel which receives it. Therefore, the light that is greater in the phases of direct light, because it is more refined, meaning the vessel that receives it is more refined. It is therefore obvious that when it comes to be clothed in the vessel of reflected light, that vessel must equalize with it. Consequently, it is necessary that if the level of reflected light reaches the Keter, then there is a refined and clear vessel there, fitting to clothe that great light of clear Keter. So here's the question. Who does he refer to when he says there's a vessel that is more refined? Meaning, what's the question here? We know that Keter is always the most refined. If so, what is he telling us here? It sounds as though it's about the degree of Keter of reflected light. The fourth phase of coarseness, it has a degree of the most refined, or phase 3 is not so refined, but it's smaller. Meaning, what's the cause here? The reflected light. So according to the meaning here, it's the clothing of direct light. That's not clear here. That's what he says here. It is therefore obvious that when it comes to be clothed in the vessel of reflected light, that vessel must equalize with it. Consequently, it is necessary that if the level of reflected light reaches Keter, then there is where? We should say in reflected light. Refined and clear vessel there, fitting to clothe that great light of clear Keter. However, the level of phase 3, whose level reaches only up to Chokhmah, the merit of the vessel that clothes the light of Chokhmah is immeasurably lower than the vessel of Keter on the level of phase 4, etc. similarly. So what does he say here? It follows from here that it depends not on direct light but only reflected light, and that's not clear. We could say this. On the one hand, when I say much more, then there has to be a greater overcoming. Where is the greater overcoming? In Malchut or in Keter? Again, what am I asking here? What he says that in every degree there's the aspect of a refined vessel where the greater light is clothed. And what does it mean that the Masach actually exists in the most coarser vessel? I would give a simple interpretation. According to the 4 phases of direct light, Keter is called his desire to bestow. So he doesn't want to receive anything, but only to bestow. So he has equivalence with the light. That's where the light of Keter shines. As soon as I finished what I want to receive afterwards, he has everything, but he wants. If so, he doesn't have that much equivalence with the light, so it receives a smaller degree, nefesh. It follows. The clothing is according to the direct light. The height of the degree is according to reflected light. The same thing I can learn from Potzuf Ab. The order of clothing, it goes by direct light. Light of Nefesh in vessel of Malchut. Light of Yechidah in vessel of Keter. The height of the degree is given by Malchut. This is very clarified. Now, what's missing here? He says, of course, where the light of Keter is clothed in the degree of Keter, it is more refined and it has more equivalence from the clothing of the vessel of Keter, of the coarse one, where there's only the degree of Chokhmah. But the question is, who causes that? The reflected light causes this? Since he has less reflected light, does he have less clothing? And if he has more reflected light, he has more clothing? That's not clear here. We should start with item 29. We could say this. Certainly, if I give a rule, then the greater light clothes into the purer vessel. It's clothed. Accordingly, there is another rule, that the vessel of Keter, where the light of Yechidah shines of the degree of Yechidah, with respect to the Keter of Partzuf Ab, where there's light of Yechidah that shines of the degree of Chokhmah, it is not so refined. Why? Question arises, who causes it to not be so refined? When you say, if I'm talking about reality, I see an order, whereas if the light is greater, their vessel is purer. So if I say the Keter of the degree of Keter is purer than the Keter of the degree of Chokhmah. But what's causing this? According to the direct light, why is that to blame? According to reflected light, meaning not according to reflected light. So if I say one who has a great coarseness that he has to overcome, then I have to say he has a greater force of refinement. If he wasn't so refined, he wouldn't be able to overcome the fourth phase. So why does he overcome only 3 phases? Because he's not as pure, as refined, so that he can overcome phase 4. Therefore, his clothing is only of a lower overcoming. That's what I would interpret, even though through the words it doesn't sound like that. Okay, what item should we begin? 29. Item 29. We might ask, if only the coarseness of phase 3 remains when the coarseness of phase 4 is refined, it turns out that the phase of Malchut disappeared from there, and only the first 3 phases, Kachab and Zeranpin, remained. In that case, that level should have been cut off from Malchut, as that part of reflected light is missing there. The reflected light of Malchut. Why then was the reflected light cut off from clothing in Keter, while that phase is not absent from there? The coarseness of Keter remains there. The thing is, why? What is he asking? If he's telling us that if there's coarseness of Keter, then there's the refined light there. If there's coarseness of phase 4, if there's coarseness of phase 4, which brings the degree of Keter, then we say there is the most refined thing there, where the light of Keter shines in the most refined aspect. Now, if it has been refined to phase 3, then there is the most refined matter there, Chokhmah. So he asks, what has been refined here? The coarseness or the most refined matter was refined? The coarseness was refined here. If the coarseness was refined, then what was missing? Malchut. But the clothing remained. It wasn't refined. Why wasn't the light of Keter left there? That's what he says here. In that case, that level should have been cut off from the Malchut, as that part of reflected light is missing there. Why then was the reflected light cut off from clothing in Keter, while that phase of clothing is not absent from there? The thing is that the matter of the 2 directions in the 10 Sefirot has already been explained in Inner Observation, Part 2, Chapter 9. The 10 Sefirot of direct light are regarded as from above downward, and the reflected light is the opposite, regarded as from below upward. Thus, below, in the place of Malchut of direct light, there is the Keter of reflected light. And in the place of Zeranpin of direct light, there is Chokhmah of reflected light, etc. Until in the place of Keter of direct light, there is Malchut of reflected light. The answer is the following. If we say that Malchut is called Keter, Malchut of reflected light, if phase 4 is missing, Keter of reflected light is missing, there's no one to clothe the Keter. And there's only phase 3, which is the Chokhmah of the reflected light, so he can only clothe Chokhmah. Item 30. Now you can understand what is written in Sefer Yetzirah, Book of Creation, that its end is embedded in its beginning, and its beginning is in its end. Phase 4, which is Malchut, is the end of all the Sefirot, and through the striking of upper light on the screen in her, she draws the light of Keter into her, meaning she binds it to shine in the Parzuf.
Thus, she is literally embedded in the beginning, meaning Keter, the beginning of all the Sefirot. Since Keter is drawn to the reflected light of phase 4, all 10 Sefirot are drawn along with it, since Keter contains all of them, meaning actually the level of Keter. Thus, Malchut is regarded as Keter reflected light, meaning the actual measure of Keter. Phase 3 is called Zeranpin of reflected light, which is second to her, attributed only to the Sefirah of Chokhmah, as she is the second to the place of the coupling at the level of Keter and 1 degree more refined, until the Keter in it. It continues similarly until the Keter in her, which is the 5th from the place of the coupling, regarded only as Malchut of reflected light. Thus, the end of the direct light, namely the Sefirah of Malchut, is embedded in the beginning of the reflected light, namely Keter of the reflected light, meaning its end in its beginning. The end of the direct light gives us the level of the direct light. 31. Now I can simply understand the question we raised. If it is refined to phase 3, then it lacks only Malchut. Why then was the reflected light so shortened that it cannot clothe up to Keter, but only from Chokhmah down? Now this is clearly understood, since there is an inverse relation here. Phase 4 is regarded as Keter here, its end in its beginning. Phase 3 as Chokhmah and so on, the complete opposite of the direct light. 32. However, we must still consider the measure of the reception of the direct light explained above. Although its end is embedded in its beginning, and Malchut draws the light of Keter for herself and becomes the Sefirah of Keter, it does not mean that Malchut draws the actual light of Yechidah for herself. It is utterly impossible for the light of Yechidah to come through the drawing of the vessel of Malchut, but only through the drawing of the vessel of Keter, of direct light. Moreover, how can the relation of the phases of direct light with the upper light that are clothed and extended so from Ein Sof change? The difference of above and below in them is immeasurably great, as we have explained above. However, they are kept in utter precision, and each phase does not move from the value of her merit even a bit. So what does it mean that he says the matter of its beginning is embedded, of its end is embedded in its beginning? Means that the light of Nefesh, of Malchut, ascribed to her by the direct light, grows and attains its own phase, which is included in Keter. It is so because Keter contains all 10 Sefirot up to Malchut, and the lights in them are regarded as the 5 parts of Yechidah, called Na'anchai of Yechidah. Hence, the light of Nefesh, of Malchut, now attains the root that she has in Keter, called Nefesh of Yechidah. Indeed, she does not attain anything above her own face. We should remember this order, and afterwards we will explain it. We learn there in the beginning. We need to go to 33. The matter of its end being embedded in its beginning means that the light of Nefesh, of Malchut, ascribed to her by the direct light. Malchut has only light of Nefesh. She never has more than Nefesh. So what does it mean that there's a level of Keter? Except what? It grows and attains its own phase, which is included in the Keter, as was received before. It is so because Keter contains all 10 Sefirot up to Malchut, and the lights in them are regarded as the 5 parts of Yechidah, called Na'anchai of Yechidah, that there is in Keter. Hence, the light of Nefesh, of Malchut, now attains the root that she has in Keter, called Nefesh of Yechidah. So, if, as we said before, the light of Nefesh, which belongs to Malchut, went through 5 vessels, it has Yechidah of Nefesh. And here it says a different order, a different understanding. Since she takes from the vessel of Keter, and Keter, with all that you have, is only Yechidah. He has Nefesh of Yechidah. She receives Nefesh of Yechidah. But it's the same order as we said, we learned there. 34. You can see that although there is an inverse relation between the 10 Sefirot of reflected light and the 10 Sefirot of direct light, in the reflected light, Malchut is called Keter. In direct light, it's called Malchut. It's called Malchut, and Keter is Keter. And vice versa. Malchut of reflected light is called Keter of direct light, and Keter of reflected light is Malchut of direct light. This 34. You can see that although there is an inverse relation between the 10 Sefirot of reflected light and the 10 Sefirot of direct light, they still do not cancel or diminish each other even slightly. One does not touch the other at all, although they emerge simultaneously from a single coupling. The level of 10 Sefirot up to the actual Keter emerges from the coupling of phase 4, though only up to Nefesh of Yechidah. The 10 Sefirot on the level of Chokhmah emerge from the coupling of phase 3, though it does not attain the phase of Chokhmah called Chaya, who Zaranpin. It is so because phase 3 is the phase of Zaranpin, of direct light, which is the light of Ruach of direct light. And the light of Chokhmah is drawn only through Chokhmah of direct light. Only the vessel of Chokhmah can receive Chokhmah of direct light. Except what? What is the importance of the Ruach? That there is a big level. Instead, the vessel of Zaranpin, which has Ruach, attains its own phase, rooted in Chokhmah, called, now it's called the phase of Ruach of Chaya. The level of Chokhmah is called Chaya. It is similar with all of them, as each of them draws and attains only its own phase in the direct light. But the level of reflected light causes it to take its phase from a high place according to the measure of the level. So what is he saying? Malchut, there is always nefesh. If the level is only bina, he has nefesh of bina. From the level of chokhmah, he has nefesh of chokhmah. From the level of keter, there is nefesh of yechidah. But direct light means that the vessels don't change. The lights don't change, the qualities don't change, except what? It depends on which level. According to the allegory, we said it's easier to understand. We always learned, as in corporeality, there's hearing, seeing, smelling, and speech, and that will never change. Between a child learning at first grade, a child learning at 8th grade, or a child learning at university or a seminary, an adult seminary. Except what? Here he has the nefesh of the first grade. Here he has nefesh of the 3rd grade, meaning seeing, hearing, smelling, speaking do not change. And direct light means as it came out from the qualities of the world of Ein Sof, which is where there's no change. And reflected light means lower one, except it changes the level that it gave. At what level is his intellect, at what level is his speech, but the vessels themselves are always the same the qualities of direct light, which emerged in the first time. That's what he says here.
נעבור לסדנת סיכום, נענה על השאלה באיזה התפעלות אתם יוצאים מהשיעור של הרבש.
Let's summarize the workshop and what inspired you in the lesson of Rabash and what touched you especially.
So I want to mention two things. First, there was some point missing here that Rabash kind of said this needs to be the point here, and to me that point was already written there here in item 28, even though in reflected light all the coarser point is greater. So I want to mention about the greatness of Rav, how he makes sure that he doesn't keep to himself anything and makes sure that we adhere to Rabash and to Baal HaSulam in the cleanest and best possible way.
It's a lesson through which you can demand the reforming light, like the Rav demanded. We can feel that there is a window that we keep looking for among us here in the tent. We need only to demand that these states will exist in us, that we will exist, that we will live these states as Rabash feels them. In this lesson, I was inspired by how much we can really ask for this. It feels like there's a place to ask for it.
It's a very special study, but we just have to continue together to focus, to try strengthen each other in that which is the cure, the remedy for us, and to draw the light that reforms each and every day. To continue the effort.
Yeah, Rabash describes the corrected states. We're inspired and demanding connection. So we need only to come closer and clothe in all these worlds that he talks about.
אני אוהב בשיעורים של הרבש.
Next friend.
זה או שאני כאילו מנותק לגמרי מהטקסט ולא מסוגל.
I like in the lessons of Rabash that it's either I'm completely disconnected from the text and I cannot clothe in anything,
או שאני מצליח
or I succeed in clothing
צורך והרצון של הרבש
in the need and the
לתאר בצורה
desire of Rabash to describe emotionally what we used to see as diagrams and sketches, and I'm grateful that I have no depictions of diagrams in the lessons of Rabash. Yesterday we saw it, and today as well. Each word, each spiritual term, he explains it emotionally, so we wouldn't be confused between above and below or things like that. That it's an emotional term of the need and the desire to either equalize with the Creator in the quality of bestowal, or that you sympathize with the quality of reception, and how much you can stop your own desire to receive the strength to overcome. And what is this grain? He puts it all and quantifies it into emotional terms. And the cleaner the mind is and the more the heart is open to Rabash, you simply feel how he plays these emotional spots of the soul, and not at all schematically. It is something that is very special and great. Only thanks to these things, when we really want to get into it, can we feel how much the light can really operate on the soul and connect us to our teachers in a better way. Next friend. I heard that according to the level of refinement, so is the level of coarseness, according to the ability to overcome. And the light of Ein Sof contains within it everything. And only according to the level of reflected light is the level determined, meaning we determine the reality. And in these lessons I keep remembering this part where Rabash explains about Baal, who is a wise disciple, the one who learns from the Creator, who is called wise. And what should one learn from the Creator? Only one thing, which is to bestow. As the Creator bestows, so should a person learn how to bestow. And this is what we need to yearn to extract from the study, from the text. That now we are being taught what it means to bestow. Next friend, we've been privileged with learning and drinking the words of Rabash and adhering to him. L'chaim.